Hello, I'm Elisabeth Alber, Senior Researcher at the Eurac Research Institute for Comparative Federalism. In this talk, on the one side, I focus on the most important actors and institutions in the executive branch of intergovernmental vertical conflict regulation. On the other side, I assess the functioning of those actors and institutions against the development and the status quo of Italy's asymmetric regionalism. In a nutshell, the case of South Tyrol exemplifies that institutionalized bilateral negotiations between South Tyrol and Rome, with the involvement of all relevant language groups and institutional actors, were and still are the key to success for balancing conflicting interests and also for widening the scope of South Tyrol's autonomy. Back in 1948, with the entry into force of the Italian constitution, 5 out of 15 regions were granted a special autonomy. One was the autonomous region Trentino-South Tyrol. It consists of the autonomous province of Bolzano-Bozen, South Tyrol, and the autonomous province of Trento-Trentino, with South Tyrol being located at the very north part of Italy, being a border area and bordering Switzerland and Austria. With the first autonomy statute back in 1948, competences were transferred from the central state to the special region. At the regional level, however, with Italian speakers being the majority, the interests of German speakers were regularly outvoted in the regional parliament. German speakers were not properly granted the right to autonomy as it had been enshrined in the international, bilateral Gruber-de Gasperi Agreement between Austria and Italy in 1946. That agreement, for example, recognized German and Italian as co-official languages in the public sphere, and also the right to mother tongue education. The non-implementation of the right to autonomy back in the 50s basically led to a period of civil and political resistance and to several negotiation rounds in different governmental levels in Italy and beyond. Most importantly, in the 1960s, the Ministry of the Interior, the Italian Ministry of the Interior, set up a commission, a special commission, the so-called Commission of 19. The Commission of 19 was composed of 11 Italian speakers, 7 German speakers, and 1 Latin speaker. Basically, the representatives sitting in the Commission of 19 were from the 3 language groups upon which the today's South Tyrol's power sharing system rests upon. Notwithstanding the dominant position of the Italian speakers in the Commission of 19, the Commission of 19 managed to successfully elaborate 137 legislative measures that were to redefine South Tyrol's position within Italy and also within the region. This bundle of measures then actually became the second autonomy statute that entered into force in 1972. Let me now turn to the most important commission dealing with the distribution of competences between Rome and South Tyrol, dealing with the implementation of the second autonomy statute. It is the Commission of 6. The Commission of 6 has been established with the second autonomy statute, thus in 1972. Initially, it was foreseen that the Commission of 6 would cease to exist once the second autonomy statute is fully implemented. Hence, in 1992, because 1992 is the year in which, at international level, basically involving the United Nations, the conflict over South Tyrol was formally closed. However, the Commission of Six did not cease to exist. On the contrary, the Commission of Six has, from 1992, evolved from a tool for the implementation of the Second Autonomy Statute into an ordinary instrument of government that, on the one side, builds trust and solves conflicts between South Tyrol and the central authorities, and thus also between language groups, and on the other side, it continues to work on the transfer of further competences from the central state to South Tyrol, to the autonomous province of Bolzano-Bozen. Let us now see how the Commission of Six is composed and how it works. The Commission of Six is newly appointed at each government change in Rome. The appointment procedures to the Commission of Six guarantee the parity of representation between the territories and language groups, and they also acknowledge the ethnically composite character of the involved parties. In concrete terms, this means that 1 out of 3 representatives from the central state that gets appointed by the national government must be from the German speakers, and 1 out of 3 representatives from South Tyrol must belong to the Italian speakers, with 2 representatives appointed by the South Tyrolean Parliament and 1 representative appointed by the members of the South Tyrolean and the Trentino Parliament when sitting together as a regional parliament. The representation of a Latin speaker is also guaranteed. The national government, for example, can nominate a German speaker or a Latin speaker. Also, the South Tyrolean Parliament can nominate a Latin speaker instead of a German speaker. One further issue is noteworthy regarding the composition of the Commission of Six. Formally, all its members do have the same weight, but in practice, many of them do hold political or important professional posts at provincial and national level that are indeed of different weight. This can be viewed critically, but one can also argue that this is the key to success of the Commission of Six because its members benefit from multiple parallel semi-formal communication channels towards the political parties, towards important civil administration posts, and so on and so forth. Work-wise, all the members of the Commission of Six enter dialogue when discussing and negotiating the wording and especially the interpretative margin of a so-called Enactment Decree. An Enactment Decree is a special source of law by which competences are transferred from Rome to South Tyrol. Once a draft text of an Enactment Decree is agreed upon by all members of the Commission of Six, and this is a practice and not a written rule, it is submitted to the policy-relevant ministry of the national government, and ultimately the Enactment Decree gets enacted as a presidential decree. This means that the Enactment Decree bypasses the national parliament. But ultimately, the President of the Republic of Italy guarantees the constitutionality of the Enactment Decree. So you see, there is a favorite channel basically to deal over conflicts and over the transfer of competences between Rome and South Tyrol, by means of the work of the Commission of Six. The Commission of Six has a secretariat in Rome. It works mainly behind closed doors to be able to discuss very delicate issues. Trust obviously is a precondition to get work done, and whenever needed, the Commission of Six can also meet within South Tyrol, and more specifically within the premises of the government commissioner in the capital city of South Tyrol, in Bolzano-Bozen. The Government Commissioner is an institution that represents the central authorities in South Tyrol. She or he also fulfills the role of a prefect in the sense that she or he has the responsibilities in the fields of public order and security and has also responsibilities as to the staff belonging to the central state authorities operating in South Tyrol. There are very few because South Tyrol actually has a very vast competence catalogue. Moreover, in past, all the legislation that had been approved by the provincial parliament, by the South Tyrolean parliament, had to be notified by the government commissioner to enter into force. This so-called preventive control of provincial legislation was abolished with the constitutional reform of 2001. Now, the central government can challenge provincial laws in front of the Constitutional Court only after their entry into force. This was already the situation before, but with regard to provincial appeals against central state legislation. The relevance of the Commission of Six and the Government Commissioner for South Tyrol's vertical intergovernmental relations, and obviously also for the tools of conflict regulation more specifically, gets particularly evident when we look at the weaknesses of the entire system of intergovernmental relations in Italy. In absence of a chamber that truly represents territorial interests within Italy's bicameral parliament in Rome, the relations between the state, the central state, and the regions, thus the 20 regions comprising basically the two autonomous provinces, South Tyrol and Trentino, unfold in a so-called standing conference of the central state, the regions, and the autonomous provinces. This body, the standing conference, is regulated by ordinary legislation only. It is composed by regional and provincial governors. However, the interests of the regions within Italy are very, very different. Therefore, in practice, the regions favor bilateral, vertical relations with the central state, not least because the position of the standing conference vis-à-vis the central state is weak. Basically, it is of consultative nature only. To conclude, and as said in the very beginning, bilateral negotiations were and are the key to South Tyrol's autonomy, with the Commission of Six as its most important actor and the Government Commissioner as the institution representing the central state in South Tyrol. Within Italy, all special regions actually do have commissions, such as the Commission of Six, to implement their special autonomies. However, they made and make use of the respective commission to a very different extent. For example, more than 190 enactment decrees have been adopted for South Tyrol, with most of them dealing with the mechanisms of cohabitation of South Tyrol's language groups, the Germans being 70%, the Italians being 26%, and the Latins being 4%. This number, the 198 enactment decrees for South Tyrol, corresponds to almost 5 times those of Sicily and Sardinia, and almost 3 times those of the Aosta Valley. Sicily, Sardinia, and the Aosta Valleys are other regions that do actually have special autonomies. This again shows the relevance of South Tyrol's Commission of Six and its innate communication channels for vertical intergovernmental relations and conflict regulation. I hope this was a good introduction into the basics of intergovernmental relations and conflict regulation in Italy, and especially in relation to the South Tyrolian case. Thank you very much.